Hello, today is Wednesday, October 3rd. This is the standard kubeadm office hours. I'm going to share my screen real quick. Hopefully folks can see my screen. The first thing, which I didn't actually add to the agenda item, was to talk about a bug that was recently filed. And I said we should talk about it here. I think somebody might have closed it. Oh. Yeah, I reopened it. Here we go. It has to do with the UX and backport changes that we need to do for the default way that people typically try to use kubeadm to custom configure their cluster is they will often use print defaults. The problem with print defaults is it throws in everything. And if they want to take that defaults file and feed it into a init, it won't work because it has extra data that is not pertinent to init. And then secondly, if they try to fit it into join, it also won't work because it has extra information that's not pertinent to join. So on conversation on Slack, there was a couple different options there. What I'd like for us to do in this conversation today is come to conclusion, write up what we decide is the best UX. Ross, I know you're on the call. I saw one of the comments that you made on Slack. Do you want to talk about your thoughts there?
Yeah, so basically I think that the best solution here is like to have a couple of different subcommands somewhere. One of the ideas is to have like kubeadm config print and then either init -defaults or defaults init, or the other option is to keep the current print defaults and have init and join subcommands of it.
I like that option. The one problem I have with it, though, is that we can't easily backport that, even though we have like a minor regression. I think one of the things we could do is on init and join, we could ignore superfluous data as a backport fix, and then make this and deprecate the existing print defaults in preference for this workflow in 113. Thoughts?
Yeah, I think that this can work.
Fabrizio?
So you are suggesting to basically accept a config file when I'm doing it in it, accept a config file with a join object.
So long as it has the init object, yes, but don't error on the join. Maybe just instead of erroring, just print a warning or something.
Okay, I got it. I have to check if it is a quick fix, because there is one function that handle all these exclusive condition. Mm-hmm. This is all in one point, but I don't know where the function is called. So I have to check, but it's something that we can check. I will align with Ross offline.
I think that actually we may need to pass like some state, because the function where this check is performed is at a pretty central place, or at least that's my memory.
Yeah, I think we can rally on Slack to deal with this, but the problem we currently face is that 1.12.1 is due for release on Friday. I would ideally like to get at least a minimal fix in for cherry pick minimal fix in for 1.12.1, which is this Friday, so that way people aren't blocked in the community, so that they can use the standard workflow that's already documented. And then for the future, we can always deprecate the existing one and go with, I like Ross's preference from a UX perspective, I like that workflow better. I think it's cleaner.
I just checked the code. Probably making it tolerant from the other object is just commenting 2 lines of code, but we have to test.
Yeah, that's what I figured. I remember reviewing it when it went in, so I knew it was centralized. Right. Are there any more questions about that issue? That's probably the biggest one that's fed in from the field. Are there any other inputs that are coming in from the wild that folks want to discuss? Current issues that are inbound from the 112 release?
I have one.
What's the issue number?
I need to fetch it out. Yeah, it's about the versions queue we introduced with stable 1. So if you have we now have stable 1 with as the default. So if the user stays on 112 for a long time and decides to restart the cluster at some point in 115, for instance,
yeah,
his kubeadm client is going to be 112, but the client is going to fetch the images for 115.
Yes, I know that. My plan was after the 112 release is to fix that version in the cherry pick version to be stable 112, or stable 112, 1.12. And that should fix the problem temporarily. I don't like our versioning semantics, and I saw your whip. I was waiting on your whip because I saw a comment fly by. The problem is I have too many PRs to review across many areas. And if it's a whip and you said you weren't happy with it, I just skipped it. The problem with that is like we have to maintain this little perturbation every single time. It doesn't make a lot of sense. I'd rather for us to auto insert a version information and to have like a flow that basically says if that tries stable 1, for the latest version, only if stable 1 dot current version that's encoded in the code, it doesn't exist. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So what I did in my PR was, I think it's already ready for review. What I did, so it downloads the version from the endpoint. So if the version is very new, it also compares it to the version of the client. And if the version from the remote endpoint is one minor version newer, it uses the version from the client. So as an example, the remote is 115, the client locally is 112. So what it's going to do is going to use stable 112 for the images.
Yes. But so that's the problem with something like that, though, is you can get yourself into a weird scenario. You should probably error, right? I think that's an error condition just because of our support matrix, right? If the endpoint you reach is 115, you shouldn't be deploying 112 bits on there because it's unsupported. We only support a skew of 1.
Yeah, the question here is, should we throw a warning or error?
I think error. I can review your PR if you want to link to it in the docs.
Yeah, we can error, but that's going to be an error by default always, unless the user hard codes a version using the flag Kubernetes version.
So why don't we take it to the PR? I do know that this is an issue that we need to fix on the 112 branch. The only reason I put stable 1 in there is just so that we didn't have to block the release folks for the release to try and merge something because it was their first time going through the cycle. And that's we need to kind of get rid of this problem to just fix it.
Okay. The PR is linked to the issue.
Are there other inbound issues for 112 that we heard not, that needs attention that folks are aware of? Going once, twice, 3 times. All right. So if there aren't, Fabrizio, what I can do here is open up this KEP. And if you want to talk it through, we can just like agree or disagree and commit on certain pieces. So that way we just keep rolling here.
Okay. So I think that the most important part is the UX. It is in the middle of the KEP. So if you can scroll in the proposed solution chapter.
Right here?
Okay, so the first point is that, okay, what are phases? Phases are a piece of a command. And basically what we have in kubeadm now is that we have at least 2 levels of phases. If you think to the cert phases, then inside the cert phases there are many different subphases. So I think that this is something that we want to preserve, and this list of phases should be part of the help of the command. So I think that one point that we should make clear for the UX is that how we can see which phases are in a command simply print executing the command help. So kubeadm init -help will print at the end of the help the list of the phases.
Let me go to the raw version here.
I didn't catch you.
I just want to just disable the comments here for a second. Okay, keep going.
Okay, so then there is the second bit is that how are we going to let the user invoke phases? And in this proposal, what is there is that we can use some flags after inside a command. So and if there is a proposal where I can execute more than one phase, so I can, for instance, run kubeadm init only phases or apply phases as you prefer, and then give a list of phases that I want to do. This is a variation from what we have now in phases, because now in phases, basically you can invoke only one phases at a time.
So I don't disagree with the long-term objective of doing something like this, but I don't also want to tie it to promotion of kubeadm, right? I don't think it's necessary for us to have this explicit flow. Or this implicit flow. This is totally implicit, not explicit. So I think if we were to well document the phases alone as they exist today, and have the ability for people to independently execute the phases in a well-defined set order, I think that will be enough for most people. This would be nice to have for sure in the future, but I don't think it's a requirement as we try to move kubeadm to GA. Because I don't want to block on this, because there's complexity here and issues that come from this.
Okay, let's try to split down the problem in two parts. The first part is that why I think that it is necessary to move phases to manage phases from the same command. The reason behind this is that only merging phases and the command, you can clean up a lot of code.
Oh yeah. I think if we were to set up these, there are ways to copy and leverage the same subcommands across two locations, so that way you dedupe the code and you're using the common same subcommand across both, and that's done all over the place in Golang examples. But if we do that and have explicit execution, so it'd be kubeadm init certs, right, or kubeadm, you could do each individual phase for init as a separate subcommand. I think that is better for sure. I think that specific piece is separable from the implicit ordering, the skip, and basically the implicit ordering and the explicit skip. Because this adds extra complexity. I'd like to do this in two steps, right? The first step.
Okay, but Tim, if instead of giving the option to execute a list of phases, I only give the option to execute one phase. So I put out of the table the problem of ordering. It will be acceptable?
Yes.
So,
yeah, I think it's acceptable, yes.
So instead of having only phases, I will have kubeadm init phase. Yes.
I think that is totally acceptable.
And so I basically have a different UX for doing what I can do now.
Yeah, you'd have a different UX for what you're currently doing now. But the one thing I'd like to tie into all of this is part of our logging that we have for execution of different phases is to make sure that the logging is very explicit about where we are in what phase. And we don't currently do that. So if we were to actually prefix a tag, which would be like, a bracketed, this is the phase we're in for every single phase that we execute on, that's super helpful to the user, because there's been a lot of requests for people to, they do their own phasing right now, but it's difficult for them to understand what are the exact phases that I execute and in what order.
Okay, that makes sense. So now that I have a kind of official name of phases, I should reflect this name of phases in the logging.
Yes. And I don't think you need to do it all at once either. I think we can do this incrementally, right? Like we could do this in steps for some of this, for an attack plan, because if you do it all at once, like the review, I'll lose my mind. Kind of like every API review, I lose my mind.
No, yes, I agree, and this is the second piece of this cap. So okay, point number one, I think it is agreed. We go for this UX, but allowing to execute or skip only one phase.
Yes, that seems fine.
Okay. The second
but not the whole like implicit DAG bit here, right? So that's the one bit I think is too, you're going to add complexity. So
yes, I simplify this one, and then the second bit is that I think that for doing this we need a kind of phase executor, runner, or workflow manager, call it as you want. that should be in charge for executing this order list of phases?
That's the bit that I said. I get what you're doing with this one, and that's the bit where I think eventually adding that and having a DAG execution model makes sense. Kind of very similar to how COPS works. But what I'm saying is, like, we don't need that for GA. That's like an added. Let's do that later on.
But I think that it is simpler for doing with that.
I'd have to see what you mean by simpler. Like, if you have a concrete example of how you would do it that is simpler. What I'm slightly concerned about is that what happens if people do weird ordering, right?
No, I'm excluding I don't want to give people the option to change the ordering.
So it would just be like a list, and then the list would still be executed in order, and all you would do is explicitly.
We have two options: or giving a list, but the list will always be executed in an ordered fashion.
Yeah.
Or we don't give the user the option to give a list, but only the option to pass a single phase.
I like the option for only a single phase for right now.
Yes, it is simpler. I agree with you. And let me just,
So this is you and I talking. Lubomir, what do you think?
So the executor workflow that Fabrizio suggests is just an interface, and each phase is going to be using this interface. It's a code refactor, to my understanding.
Yeah, I get it. I think the UX, though, from a user's perspective, like, do it in baby steps, right? For every every iteration of the cycle, every time we make a change, there's this segfault that people have in their brains about why we're making this change. So if we do it in an incremental way, it's easier to consume. Like, for example, the splitting of the config. I know people are very confused by that. And because we didn't think about the UX in a staged approach, the consumption of that type of change becomes, we spend a lot of time talking to people and reasoning about it. So I'm not just thinking about code-wise what this means from an engineering perspective. I'm thinking about what it means from a consumer perspective.
I think the list of custom phases, custom ordering is basically a convenience to the user, but we don't really need it because the user can already write the bash file.
Exactly.
And in the bash file, he can specify the wrong phases, and that's his responsibility. We already expose a way to execute a single phase, and I think if the goal here is to basically move the phase command under init, something like that.
The one explicit thing that is nice about having explicit order, a person actually having to type one phase at a time from a bash perspective, is that they know exactly what phase they failed on from the actual CLI bashed invocation, right? That can be percolated back up in their automation if it's done that way. Because otherwise, if you have an implicit ordering, you don't know exactly which phase. You'd have to look at the logs to figure out what thing you failed on.
But sorry, but if in the help I will print the list of phases, I will print the ordered list of phases.
Yes, that would be helpful. So go ahead.
If we move at the top of a phase, at the beginning of each phase, if we print a log message like saying, this is a phase of kubeadm, and I'm not sure we should print a number there, but if we print a message, then the user can look at the ordering in the main kubeadm init that calls all the phases. My point is that we probably should have a message on top of each phase. So when the phases start, we see the phases executed in order.
So I was of the mind that I don't particularly care about having a single line versus having every line for a phase have a prefix tag. So that way it's clear from a user's perspective, if they fail somewhere halfway in a phase, that they can copy that single line of text and give it to a developer, and the developer will instantly know where it failed and why, or where it failed at least. Otherwise, if you give the whole log, you have to trace back the details.
Yeah, this is useful.
I'm taking notes in the yeah. So
Okay. Other than that, I don't think there's anything else that I thought this was the only part that was a little fuzzy on. I think if we just make some of the changes we just talked about, I think we can agree and just get this thing merged so we can go. Are there other questions, comments, complaints, concerns for anybody else?
I mean, one of the questions here was, should we move phases to a main command, or should it be a subcommand of init? I don't think it should be under init, because join also can be considered a consumer of phases in a way, because the kubelet phase is also part of join.
You'd have to split it up. Like there should still be a kubeadm phases, and init should also have the ability to execute its init phases.
I don't agree. I think that the phases command should simply go away.
I'm not opposed to that either. I agree with that idea. I think that simplifies the code a lot.
Because phases are part of a command, so I want to see in the help of the command, I want to invoke them from the command.
So,
that'll also mean that we need to promote some other operations to first-class subcommands, though, like certs, right?
Yes. What we have now under the alpha phases umbrella, which is not a real phase, should find another home.
So instead of a fork being kubeadm init and certain phase fork, I think we should still keep the subcommand phase in there. It's simpler for us to sandbox the phases in a subcommand under init if you want. That's my opinion.
Sorry, could you repeat? I didn't catch the.
So if we have my idea here is to have kubeadm init phases or kubeadm phases as subcommands, because this gives us the power to sandbox all the phases under a subcommand. Otherwise, if you want to use kubeadm init and how are you going to do it? Like how are you going to distinguish a phase under init? That's my question.
Because I'm going to use a flag.
With the problem with the flag is that, how about you want to pass a flag to the phase then? So you pass the phase as a flag, right?
Yes.
But then what if you want to pass a flag to the phase itself?
I'm writing in the notes. So if I want to pass phase cert minus API serve advertise, they are just other flags.
I see what Lubomir is saying from an actual subcommand p flags perspective. It's weird. If it was a subcommand, if it was kubeadm init phases, then certs is a separate. Every subcommand is isolated, where certs is one of the phases, and then the args pass directly to the the subcommand for phases, right? It'd be like kubeadm init is the main command, or kubeadm is the main command, subcommand, 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 arguments. Because if you were to have a flag, if you were to insert flag overrides for every single thing down here, it would be very confusing. If you do kubeadm init minus foo, some other option, right? And then you do minus phase certs, because the ordering then would be confusing, right? This thing here would have to be in some weird block ordering versus being a subcommand ordering. Do you know what I'm saying, Fabrizio?
Yes, I think that, okay, you're suggesting not to do in this way, but to do
not even minus, just phase.
Yes.
And then minus API server.
Yeah, oh, sorry, okay. And then all the other flag.
Yeah. Because that way, the ordering is super explicit about where the arguments, where the flags live, right? So it would be like this. So that way, if you did init, you could still do minus foo init, and you could do phase minus foo phase, and then you could do certs, right? Because if you just have this flag here, then it gets weird.
Also, my question about like kubeadm init, should the phases live under init, or should we move them to a main command?
I think you can move it to a common library. I don't think it should be a common subcommand anymore. I kind of agree with Fabrizio there, because the phases don't, it's so confusing to a user, because we've lumped in too many things into phases where they don't apply for a lot of scenarios. We should split, like have a set of things that are common into a library, and just have like an add subcommand, right, function for things that are common. But for other things, they should be split into join. They should be split into init, and other things should become their own subcommand, like certs, right?
Tim, only one question. If I'm going to use a phase subcommand under init,
Yes.
how can I skip a phase? I want to install, I want to create a cluster without the kube proxy.
You want to create a cluster without the kube proxy. You'd have to do one phase at a time.
Okay.
A person would have to basically know the phases they want to execute and execute each phase. That was one of the things we were talking about.
Okay,
Yeah,
so we are not giving the option to skip, but you have to run the whole sequence except the one that you want to skip.
Or you could add, can you do that? Can you put that thing back? That was actually useful. Just say like here. So we're here, we're gonna say no. If you wanted to, if you wanted to do a skip, you could do kubeadm init.
Yeah, but please remove foo.
Skip phase equals proxy, or remove skip, whatever, and that would still allow you to give your skip if you wanted to do exclusion only. So this would be explicit ordering, and this would be exclusion.
Okay, so exclusion is managed directly in the init command, while invocation is managed in a subcommand.
we can still move skip phase under phase.
You could. Okay. Well, I don't know, because phase is explicit invocation of one or the other. skip phase is an aggregate thing that basically says I'm going to skip just this one piece. It's only one piece because the aggregate is init. If you were to say kubeadm init phase skip phase, what the hell does that mean? Because your init phase is saying you're going to run one thing, which is like certs. That's the explicit invocation.
And then it becomes a question again, what if the user wants to skip a couple of phases at the same time?
Then they're going to have to do explicit invocation of the DAG. They'd have to say kubeadm init foo, kubeadm init phase bar, and then skip the ones they don't care about.
But I think that skip phases can be a list.
Or it could be a list, proxy, certs. I want a non-functional cluster. That could work too.
And we have to print a help screen with all the correct ordering of the phases.
But the ordering on the phases is printed by kubeadmin init help.
Yeah.
I like it.
Okay.
What do you think?
I think that this subcommand add a little bit of complexity, but
I think from the UX perspective, it's cleaner or clearer. Not necessarily cleaner, but it's clear from how I use subcommands. What do you think, Lubomir?
Well, it's a conflict if we have the phase as a flag, because you pass a flag to init, and then you cannot pass all the phase flags to the init, because that's a conflict of flags. We have to have a subcommand eventually at some occasion.
I agree.
Okay, we have to. I think that we have to make this subcommand generated dynamically.
That's because of the executor plan you have?
Yes, because of one point which is really important for me is that we have to define the list of phases and the flags and whatever all in one place, which is the init command or the executor for the init command, and then everything should be generated from this.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
go ahead.
No, otherwise we fall back in the error, in the problem that we had in the past of the duplication of flags, inconsistency between implementation and so on.
That's super easy to fix. That's just a problem that we had from the past. We fixed this in Sonobui. We have commands, subcommands that percolate across major commands, and we just have a separate function that says add subcommand foo, and then the foo is the tacked on to that thing. So it's easy to just put it in a library and then say add the subcommand.
Okay. Okay, and I will start. I don't remember if I'm only the one who volunteered for this task. So
I was going to help with the Cobra stuff, like moving the commands itself.
I can absolutely help with the execution. I want to get the actual kep merged. That's the whole purpose of this conversation, is to like agree and commit, or disagree and still commit on certain things we want to get done, and then break up the work so that way it's not, we don't have to rely on any one person.
Okay, so let's get the kep merged as soon as possible. I will iterate with the comments and the notes from this meeting tomorrow, probably.
Okay. Are there any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns? I got, there are reasons why people want to do certain things. Jason, you PM'd me, so just feel free to talk. Like, some people do these skip phases because they have separate configuration that they invoke. So it's just, different providers do different things. We want to give those knobs to the user, just because some people are power users and they do crazy stuff that most other people don't do. No worries. Are there any other questions, comments, complaints, concerned with regards to the phases changes? This is more than enough work to keep us busy for the next week. I do know that the configuration change is coming too, and I already put comments on your PR, Fabrizio. They're very minor comments. We could probably get the initial merge done, but do you want to talk about, I don't think we have enough time to talk about the config changes in detail today.
No, I think that the next week it will be interesting to start discussing about some change and of the API, for instance. I don't know, improve control plane configuration by using substructure.
Yeah, we still have the weird debt that we have with the annotation. I forgot what they're a list, right? So we still need to like rationalize that, and I need to go back and look at the notes that I wrote down a while ago, because we kind of did things at the end of cycle to fix some bugs with the initial proposal that we had.
Yes.
So maybe next week we can have some time to sit down and just chat about the config changes and try to get that synced up.
Makes sense. I will start to write. Maybe I ask help to Ross, which is executing on some of them. And we try to rationalize the change, why we are doing this, pro, cons, the drawbacks, and so on.
Sounds good. So
you can just
great.
So just so folks are aware, those are the two big P0 items that we have for this cycle, is config to beta and phases. And I think phases stuff is going to be Fabrizio, Tim, and Lubomir. And anyone else who wants to join in. I don't know if folks want to help here or pitch in, but happy to help folks on ramp to this stuff. So it's Fabrizio, Ross.
I wouldn't mind helping if you guys needed it.
With which one, Merrick?
Well, so I think that I'm going to work. I was talking about with Fabrizio about removing the self-hosting feature.
Oh, okay.
But I could also help with the phases stuff as well, as it looks interesting.
Yeah, I think having a UX that's clearly defined, because alpha phases is not, it is just generally helpful to the user.
My proposal here is that we start, me and Fabrizio start the work, and eventually, if we need the help, we are going to ask specifically about that.
Okay. As long as we keep on trucking here, those are the two big ones. Tangentially, I've already started on this to solicit feedback from the KubeSpray folks, as well as I'm talking with Liz, and we're going to do a cluster API setup soon for 112-ish bits, and then talk with automation about providing any version. So that's the first part.
Sounds good.
With regards to release packaging, I don't exactly know who's going to take point on this right now. I do need to talk with the release team, because the problem with the release team is every release cycle is a new release person who has to go through the process and learn everything again. And there hasn't been a clearly defined alternative route yet from the K8's infra group. So I think this is kind of a wait and see.
I attended that meeting last week, so I'm putting together a straw man on what ideal packaging release looks like. Was going to do it for Friday, but we've also got the cluster API AWS to do. Yeah, so I'll have a strawman document. Probably won't be that detailed at some point on Friday for people to look at. Send it around.
That would be helpful if you wanted to CC SIG cluster lifecycle on that one, because we are definitely going to be like the first people to try and pilot a lot of this stuff, because we have been at the tip of the spear of pain with release packaging.
Yeah. Cool. All right.
Merrick, this is the other P1 item that Fabrizio said. There's other things too, general cleanup and evaluation of other features is useful for sure.
Okay, yeah, I had been talking to him about it yesterday, but I was going to plan on starting it. I know that he had mentioned concerns about how we were going to remove it and wanted to talk about that today, but.
About the self-hosting? We didn't want to remove it. We wanted to make sure that none of the logic in init or join has any dependency on it, and it doesn't, I think, anymore. But we still wanted to have a separate subcommand, like a kubeadm pivot or something like that. But once you do this, it'd be like a warning. This is a destructive change. You're getting off of the beaten path. You know, buyer beware. You're on your own now.
So, team, we are going to preserve the pivoting logic in another form.
You could also you could either add it as a subcommand, or you could have it as a separate tool. Either or.
Yes. The question is, now I'm starting with Marek to think about how to clean up the code, and basically we have to choose if to remove the self-hosting totally, and then eventually when we have a clear idea, we will restore the code, or we are going to make the effort now to move the pivoting code somewhere else.
Yep.
What do you prefer? To move the code now?
I don't have the community has pushed back against me, and I've kind of I don't have strong opinions. They would like it to still be a kubeadm subcommand, right? So that's a totally separate subcommand. That was one of the requests that we got feedback from other people, just to have like a separate option to just do the pivoting for you. So you'd have standard kubeadm workflow, but you would have a set of destructive subcommand that does the pivoting.
Okay.
Fabrizio, is it possible to remove all the code that we currently have gated with the feature gate? Basically move it to a piece of file somewhere and store it there for future usage. Is that an option?
If the problem is to keep the code, it is versioned in Git. The problem, I think that the question is if we want to keep the coding in the code base and make it available to the user or not. Teams is saying yes.
Well,
I don't have opinion. It's just to know how to exect.
I actually don't really want it there, but I got pushback. So the pushback from the community, and I want to make sure we listen to them, was that it's still useful to a lot of consumers, and they would still use it. So I think having that option available to them is probably still important. We don't want to disenfranchise folks and make decisions in absentia. So if that's what they want, then I think it's totally fine. I think that's a good, if worse comes to worse and people don't use it, we can eventually deprecate, right?
Okay, so we create this command that does the pivoting and warn us that once you do the pivoting, you are out of support for upgrades and whatever.
Yep, exactly. You're on your own.
Okay.
I know we put this as a P2, but if people are looking to help, and I'm going to see if I can get Chuck and Jason to focus back in on this.
Team, I commented today. I prototype on the stacked etcd things, yes. and I commented on the issue. I make some good progress.
Did you want to bump this to a P1?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm committed to make it happen. So I think that the biggest question to be decided there is how we are going to choose or let the user choose the IP address that etcd should use.
So that's for the stacked etcd?
Yes. Because basically the main difference between the local etcd and the stacked etcd is that etcd is responding on a public IP instead of local loopback.
But
so we need to we have two options. We use one address that is already there, which is tricky but easy to implement for etcd. So, for instance, we decide that etcd will answer to another port on the same address that the API server uses.
That's for the peer host, yes. But for the actual hosted service, no, right? Like that's the weird conundrum.
That's for the peer host, yes.
Yeah, so you need the IP address of you need the peer port on the same address as the API server, typically. That's okay. The way it's set up in the instructions. But not that you still have local loopback for the main etcd server, for the API server to etcd connection is still local loopback, but the peer port is on the API server address.
Actually, I need also the client to answer to a public IP.
Why do you need the client to answer to a public IP?
Because when I'm adding another node, I have to call from, I'm executing kubeadm on the master 2. I need to call etcd on master 1. And
no, you can hit local. You can hit, when you're executing, you can hit local and get members. So if you're on,
yes, but I'm in the process of creating the second master.
Yes.
So I don't have etcd local.
But like when you lay down,
and before creating a etcd node local, I have to go on the existing instance of etcd and call add member. Otherwise, I'm not creating a cluster. I created two separated instances.
I see your problem. I know what you're saying. It's just it's an ordering of where you are from the code flow, because it's via bash. It's easy. Via via having only limited information from the second node. It's not.
Yes, it is a problem of the dynamic sequence of startup that we have. So we don't know the things in advance, but we know only when we are executing. But this is addressed. It works in my prototype. If it is fine to reuse the same IP address of the API server,
it typically is okay. It should only be used for joining, though. Like the API server, the way we had it structured, there are reasons why we only use localhost for the API server connection. That went beyond just connectivity. So we should probably. Oh, I have a hard stop. I have to exit this call. Why don't we chat on Slack and point to the issue? Point Jason and I to the issue, and Chuck, and we can chat there. I think it's totally fine if you do a cert SAN for those two addresses, localhost and API server.
Yes, the issue is linked in the meeting notes.
Okay, cool. Sounds great. But I got to drop because we have another call. There's a separate call using the same Zoom, so I got to go.
All right, bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.